Mailman notices stains on elderly woman's pants, looks inside house and calls 911. It was an ordinary morning in the quiet suburban neighborhood when the mailman, John Carter, noticed something unusual. As he approached the worn-out porch of Mrs. Eleanor's house, a reclusive elderly woman known for her kindness, he saw faint stains on her pants as she shuffled inside. His curiosity piqued, but what he saw next through the slightly ajar door sent chills down his spine. Broken furniture, shattered glass, and a faint but unmistakable trail of crimson leading deeper into the house. His instincts kicked in, and with trembling hands he dialed 911, unaware of the dark secrets about to unravel. The sun cast a gentle golden glow over Maplewood Lane, a quiet neighborhood lined with charming, pastel-colored houses. Each house had a well-tended garden, filled with blooming flowers and carefully trimmed hedges. It was the kind of place where neighbors exchanged smiles, children played on the sidewalks, and nothing unusual ever seemed to happen. Mrs. Eleanor Harper's home, however, stood out in stark contrast. The once vibrant yellow paint on her cottage had faded to a dull beige, and the front yard was overgrown with wild grass. A creaky wooden porch and a sagging front door hinted at neglect, but the mailman, John Carter, always assumed it was just the way she liked it, simple and unbothered. Eleanor was well known in the neighborhood. A kind widow in her late 70s, she had a penchant for baking cookies and donating them to the local shelter. But in recent months, she had grown reclusive, rarely seen outside except to fetch her mail or water her plants. As for John, he had been the mailman for this route for over a decade. Friendly but sharp-eyed, he had an uncanny ability to notice even the smallest changes in his surroundings. On that particular morning, it wasn't just the stains on Eleanor's pants that caught his attention. It was the eerie silence and the faint metallic scent wafting from her door. Little did John know, this serene morning was about to unravel into a day he would never forget. As John Carter hesitated on the porch, a strange sense of foreboding gripped him. The faint metallic scent grew stronger, mingling with the musty odor of an unventilated home. Peeking through the gap in the slightly open door, he saw the chaotic scene inside. The living room was in disarray, cushions torn, a lamp shattered, and faint smudges of what appeared to be blood staining the carpet. Eleanor, who had always greeted him with a warm smile, now seemed distant and uneasy. She moved slowly, her hands trembling as she clutched the edge of a chair for support. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. John's instincts screamed at him to act, but he also knew he couldn't jump to conclusions. Was it an accident, a break-in, or something far worse? With a racing heart, he made the call to 911, not realizing he had just uncovered the first thread of a chilling mystery. Eleanor Harper had lived on Maplewood Lane for nearly 40 years, ever since her husband George had passed away in a tragic car accident. She had been the heart of the neighborhood, always lending a helping hand, but her life had taken a darker turn in recent years. Financial struggles forced her to let go of the housekeeper who had been her lifeline, leaving her to navigate her declining health and increasing isolation alone. Beneath her kind exterior, Eleanor carried a deep sorrow, one she rarely spoke of, and her sudden reclusiveness had become a quiet mystery to her neighbors. John Carter, the mailman, was more than just a friendly face delivering letters. A former police cadet who had left the academy due to a family tragedy, John had a sharp eye for detail and an innate sense of justice. His morning routine gave him a window into the lives of the residents, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off at Eleanor's house that day. Detective Rachel Monroe, a seasoned investigator with a reputation for solving cold cases, was called to the scene after John's report. Known for her no-nonsense approach, Rachel carried the weight of her own past, an unsolved case that had haunted her for years. Her sharp mind and relentless determination made her a force to be reckoned with. But the Harper case would test her in ways she hadn't anticipated. With each of them playing a pivotal role, the stage was set for a chilling unraveling of secrets. Detective Rachel Monroe arrived at the scene just as the paramedics were wheeling Eleanor Harper out on a stretcher. She was conscious but visibly shaken, muttering incoherently about shadows and the basement. The officers on site had already cordoned off the property, and Rachel's sharp eyes scanned the chaotic scene inside the house. The living room was in shambles. Furniture was overturned, picture frames shattered, and faint streaks of blood led from the doorway toward the back of the house. On the coffee table sat an empty teacup, its rim smeared with a pale red residue. The smell of iron and decay hung heavy in the air. Rachel's first stop was the basement. The officers hesitated to go down, reporting a pungent, almost unbearable smell. With a flashlight in hand, Rachel descended into the darkness. At the bottom of the stairs, she found the source of the stench, a pool of dried blood leading to a bundle of old blankets. When she pulled them back, a collective gasp echoed. Beneath the fabric was a makeshift grave. The remains were partially decomposed, making immediate identification impossible. Upstairs, John Carter gave his statement. He recounted seeing the stains on Eleanor's pants and the unsettling sight through the door that prompted his call. She seemed scared, like she was hiding something, he admitted. Rachel noted his sharp observation skills, but also his unease, questioning if he might know more than he was letting on. Neighbors were also questioned. Most described Eleanor as kind but increasingly withdrawn in recent months. One neighbor, however, mentioned strange visitors, a man in his 40s who often came at odd hours. He drove a beat-up blue sedan and never stayed long. She seemed uncomfortable around him, the neighbor added. The early evidence painted a grim picture. A violent struggle, a hidden body, and Eleanor at the center of it all. But Rachel knew better than to make assumptions. Eleanor might be a victim, a witness, or something far more sinister. The key lay in unraveling the connections between her, the unknown man, and the chilling discovery in the basement. With these fragments in hand, the investigation officially began, and Rachel could feel the weight of the mystery tightening around her. As the investigation deepened, strange inconsistencies began to emerge. Detective Rachel Monroe was handed Eleanor's medical report. A recent fracture in her wrist, bruises on her arms, and signs of malnutrition. While the injuries could be attributed to her age and frailty, Rachel suspected there was more to the story. A deeper search of the house revealed a locked drawer in Eleanor's bedroom. Inside, they found a series of unsettling notes, written in shaky handwriting. He's watching. Don't open the door after dark. He said it's my fault. The ominous messages hinted at a history of fear and coercion. But who was he? Meanwhile, the blue sedan mentioned by the neighbor was spotted by a patrol officer a few streets away. The driver, a man named Peter Lawson, claimed he was Eleanor's estranged nephew, visiting occasionally to check on her. His alibi seemed solid, until a neighbor produced footage from a doorbell camera showing him arguing with Eleanor late one night. When questioned, Peter's story shifted. He claimed Eleanor had been acting paranoid and accused him of bringing the darkness. The cryptic phrasing caught Rachel's attention, adding another layer to the enigma. As Rachel pieced together the clues, another discovery shook the team. Forensic experts found traces of sedatives in the teacup from Eleanor's living room. It raised a chilling question. Was she being drugged? And if so, why? Just as Rachel prepared to confront Peter with the new evidence, a uniformed officer burst into the room. "Detective, you need to see this," he said, holding up a small bloodied object recovered from the basement, a pendant engraved with the initials G.H. Eleanor's late husband. Rachel's mind raced. How could George Harper's belongings end up with a hidden body years after his death? And more importantly, was Eleanor truly a victim, or had she been hiding a deadly secret all along? As Rachel delved deeper into the investigation, the pieces of the puzzle started to fall into place, and the picture they painted was far more chilling than anyone had anticipated. Forensics identified the remains found in Eleanor's basement as belonging to a man in his early 40s, Peter Lawson's father, Michael Lawson, who had been missing for over a decade. This revelation shook Peter, who insisted he had no idea what had happened to his father and had never suspected Eleanor's involvement. The pendant engraved with GH revealed an even darker twist. A forensic analysis uncovered microscopic traces of dried blood beneath the engraving, matching George Harper's DNA. It became evident that the pendant wasn't just sentimental. It had been a weapon. Eleanor's late husband hadn't died in a car accident, as she had claimed, but had been murdered. The pieces of the story started to align. Eleanor had been harboring secrets of violence and betrayal for years. In a shocking twist, a dusty, forgotten journal was discovered in the attic. Its pages were filled with Eleanor's confessions, written in moments of guilt and desperation. The entries detailed years of abuse at George's hands, her eventual act of self-defense, and her frantic cover-up. But one entry stood out. "He knows. Michael found out. I didn't mean to hurt him, but I couldn't let him tell." Eleanor had killed Michael, Peter's father, to protect her secret, burying him in the basement alongside her guilt. The revelation sent shockwaves through everyone involved. Peter Lawson, who had always thought of Eleanor as a frail old woman, now grappled with the horrifying reality that his father's killer had been sitting across from him at countless family dinners. His outrage boiled over during questioning. "She played us all," he shouted, slamming his fists on the table. "She took everything from me." Eleanor, frail and confined to a hospital bed, broke down as the weight of her sins came crashing down. In a tearful confession, she admitted to both murders. "George was a monster," she whispered, her voice trembling. "He would have killed me if I hadn't acted first. But Michael, he was innocent. He was just trying to protect his family. I didn't mean for it to happen." Rachel, hardened by years of dealing with human depravity, found herself uncharacteristically moved. Despite Eleanor's heinous actions, the detective couldn't ignore the tragic cycle of abuse that had led to this moment. She stood by as Eleanor was arrested, watching the once kind widow crumble under the weight of her own conscience. The neighborhood reacted with shock and sorrow. Those who had seen Eleanor as a gentle soul struggled to reconcile the crimes with the woman they thought they knew. The case also reopened old wounds for Rachel, reminding her of the unsolved case that had driven her into this line of work. Yet, amidst the chaos, she found a measure of closure in knowing she had unraveled the truth. Detective Rachel Monroe sat across from Eleanor Harper in the dimly lit interrogation room. The elderly woman, frail and tear-streaked, looked nothing like the cunning killer the evidence portrayed her to be. Rachel's mind raced as she weighed the complexities of the case. Eleanor's actions were heinous, but they stemmed from years of suffering and fear. Should justice be absolute, or could compassion play a role? Peter Lawson, meanwhile, faced his own moral dilemma. Despite his rage and grief, he found himself grappling with pity for Eleanor. She had robbed him of his father, but she had also been a victim herself. "Do I press for the harshest punishment?" he asked Rachel, his voice shaking. "Or do I let her live out her days in peace, knowing she'll die with this guilt?" For Rachel, the decision wasn't hers to make, but she couldn't shake the weight of her role in exposing Eleanor's darkest secrets. Could she ever find peace, knowing the destruction this truth had wrought on everyone involved? Ultimately, Eleanor made the decision for them. "I'll confess," she said softly. "I deserve whatever comes next." With those words, she sealed her fate, leaving everyone else to wrestle with their unresolved emotions. The trial of Eleanor Harper became a media sensation, with reporters flocking to the courthouse to cover the shocking story of the elderly widow turned murderer. The evidence against her was overwhelming. The remains of Michael Lawson, the pendant stained with George Harper's blood, and her own journal of confessions. Despite her frailty, the prosecution pushed for a conviction of second-degree murder for Michael Lawson's death and manslaughter for her husband's. In court, Eleanor remained stoic, her face a mask of resignation. Her defense painted a picture of a battered woman pushed to her breaking point, forced to take drastic measures to survive. While this resonated with some others, including Peter Lawson, viewed it as an attempt to excuse the inexcusable. The jury deliberated for 2 days before delivering their verdict, guilty on all counts. However, given Eleanor's age, deteriorating health, and the mitigating circumstances surrounding her crimes, the judge sentenced her to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 5 years. It was a bittersweet conclusion. Justice had been served, but it left behind scars for everyone involved. The case also led to public revelations about Eleanor's life. Neighbors and friends grappled with their guilt for not seeing the signs of her suffering. Peter, while struggling with his own loss, chose to channel his anger into advocacy for victims of abuse, vowing to prevent others from enduring what his family had. For Detective Rachel Monroe, the resolution brought no triumph, only a quiet acknowledgement of the complexity of human nature. As she closed the case file and prepared for the next, she couldn't help but wonder how many other secrets were hiding behind the seemingly ordinary doors of Maplewood Lane. Eleanor Harper spent her final days in a minimum security prison, where she became a quiet, reclusive figure among the inmates. Despite her crimes, some of the staff and prisoners sympathized with her, seeing her as a tragic reminder of what unchecked abuse can drive someone to. Her health continued to decline, and she passed away in her sleep just 3 years into her sentence, leaving behind a legacy of both kindness and tragedy. Peter Lawson though initially consumed by anger, found a way to channel his pain. He established a foundation in his father's name to support victims of domestic abuse, ensuring their voices were heard and their stories didn't end in silence. Through his advocacy work, he found a sense of purpose, even as he continued to grapple with the shadow Eleanor's actions cast over his life. Detective Rachel Monroe returned to her regular caseload, though the Harper case lingered in her mind. It reminded her that justice wasn't always clear-cut, and that the lines between victim and perpetrator could blur in heartbreaking ways. Yet, it also reinforced her resolve to uncover the truths hidden beneath the surface of seemingly ordinary lives. The Harper case left everyone involved questioning the nature of justice and forgiveness. Can one act of self-defense justify years of deception and violence? Does suffering excuse the suffering we cause others? As the neighborhood returned to its quiet routine, a realtor prepared Eleanor's house for sale. While cleaning the attic, they discovered another journal, its pages filled with cryptic entries. One sentence stood out. "The darkness didn't start with me, it won't end with me." Was there more to Eleanor's story, or was it a warning of secrets yet to be uncovered? The answers, it seemed, were buried deeper than anyone could imagine. The Harper case was more than just a story of murder and deception. It was a profound exploration of the human condition. It exposed the unseen struggles that can unfold behind closed doors and the ripple effects of trauma that can span generations. Eleanor's life was a tragic testament to how unaddressed abuse can fester, leading to irrevocable decisions and devastating consequences. For Detective Rachel Monroe and Peter Lawson, the case was a harsh reminder of the thin line between victim and perpetrator, forcing them to confront their own beliefs about justice and morality. Society often views crime in black and white terms, yet the Harper case revealed a far more nuanced reality. It highlighted the importance of recognizing and addressing signs of abuse, fostering compassion, and supporting those who are vulnerable before their pain turns into something darker. In the end, the tragedy was not just Eleanor's, but everyone's, a failure to see and intervene when it mattered most. As Eleanor's house was sold and new residents moved in, whispers of her story faded into memory. Yet, late one night, the new owners claimed to hear faint whispers in the attic. Could it be Eleanor's lingering guilt, or were there more secrets buried in Maplewood Lane, waiting to resurface?